You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY and Political Voices Network. Outside the Box is brought to you by Roush Plumbing and Remodeling, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. You know, I showed up at my polling place yesterday. It was probably the third or fourth time that I went to vote yesterday. And and the person who was helping me go through the process, collect my information, check out my ID, it's like, oh, I watched the stream on YouTube. And I was like, oh, really? I'm flattered. Thank you so much. She's like, yeah, I see you when you're just stretching and not really paying attention during the commercial breaks. I was like, yeah, there's times where I forget that I'm on camera. That's a thing that happens still. I'm not used to it yet, but we're getting there. We're growing up. Thank you for being here, guys. One heck of a day today in the world of election politics here in Wisconsin, mirroring the trends that we have been seeing around the nation. We're going to spend this first hour. Half of it is going to be talking Wisconsin politics. Half of it is going to be talking quote unquote ceasefire in Iran and the thoughts about it there. But given that we are doing a program here in Wisconsin, I think the common sense thing to do here is jump into the election results. I am not breaking news to a single person listening to this program right now. A 20-point victory for the Democratic candidate, Chris Taylor, 60-40, which in my wildest dreams, I was guessing a 9-12-point victory when it was all said and done. Turns out even I was undershooting what was ultimately happening there. It highlights so many things that we're going to be jumping into. And it is a Professor's Wednesday, so the professors will be joining me for the second half of the program. We're going to be talking about the election a little bit, as well as Iran as well. But if you haven't been seeing it, I actually put the chart up on my my Instagram, my Facebook, and my TikTok account. It was exactly how you would expect it to look. We're talking about shifts of, and I'm just going down the list here, whether it's Richland, Lafayette, Polk, La Crosse, Chippewa, Portage, Vernon, Juneau, Buffalo, Marionette. The list goes on and on. I'm just listing a couple of them here. We're talking 33-point shift, 2-point shift, 31 point, 29, 29, 28, 28, 28, 28, 28, 27, 27, 26, 26, 26. These are massive seismic shifts in voting demographics. I think we need to address that first and foremost. But if you haven't listened to what I've been posting on socials this morning, I don't think it paints the exact story that a lot of people are aware that it does. This is not a matter of more people becoming Democrats. This is a matter of the Republican Party being completely disenfranchised with either the GOP in general or this particular candidate. I think we'll have a much more thorough picture painted in November after we see the House races and obviously the race for governor as well, to truly get a feel on a candidate by candidate basis. Because I'll be frank with you, and I said this on Friday with Jason Zimmerman after the debates. If you asked me who appeared more partisan during the debates between Maria Lazar and Chris Taylor, I would have told you, obviously, Chris Taylor. I'd argue, no pun intended, Chris Taylor was tailor-made for the GOP to run against. A progressive advocate, formerly in the legislature, partnered with Planned Parenthood for part of her life. There were a lot of things that you could run against, highlighting this woman's partisanship that I think would be red meat in a year where there was a little bit more excitement surrounding the Republican Party. With the GOP, whether it be on the Wisconsin level side, the national side, or any other state, what they are experiencing right now is what the Democrats went through in 2024. Unpopular candidates, lackluster platform, not a lot of promises actually being delivered on, and as a result, not necessarily the diehards, not the stalwarts. They always are going to show up, but the independents are the ones that bail. They don't always necessarily change sides, but they don't have to, but they aren't going to, they just don't show up to vote, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to make there. And I would argue, based on the numbers that we are seeing right now, that is what played out here in that particular election. The race that sticks out even more to me is the mayor of Waukesha, which I am not pandering to anybody here in Wisconsin. All of you listening that are local know better than me what a Democrat winning the mayor of Wisconsin means. Or excuse me, of Waukesha means. But for those of you not listening in Wisconsin, that's the equivalent of Texas flipping to 2 blue senators. Like, that is a Republican stronghold that went for Alicia Halvensleben over Scott Allen, 51.2 to 48.8. That to me is a little bit more of a canary in the coal mine kind of situation than the actual statewide race. The GOP hopefully is going to learn from this. Like, I started the program off making election fraud jokes, and yeah, I'm only going to double down on those as time goes on, because I'm kind of disgusted at this point with the people that are still buying into the concept of election fraud in 2026, at least in regards to 2020. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it also is absolutely not likely. If you want to keep blaming election fraud, if you want to run on the SAVE Act and literally do nothing else, what you saw transpire yesterday is what is going to happen for the foreseeable future. In the video I posted, I highlighted, and it's the stuff that you guys have heard me say 1,000 times over. It turns out that a platform of war crimes, a trash economy, and a masked Virgin Army zip-tying half-naked Mexican children and murdering Americans in the street, it turns out that that's actually not a particularly popular platform to run on in the eyes of a lot of people who are not devoutly in the cult. I saw a poll yesterday, I don't remember the source on it, 23% of people agreed with the idea of Donald Trump wiping Iran off the face of the earth before he ended up backing off. So it turns out that 23% of the country is genocidal maniacs, I guess, is what that particular poll highlighted there. Here's the thing, though. It's going to be really hard for that 23% of people to win any elections going forward, at least in the immediate future. Fret not. Democrats will fumble it eventually once they regain power, and Republicans will regain power again. But until then, you should expect a lot of the elections to look the way that they did yesterday. And this is not me. I am not gloating. I am not celebrating. I talk about the things that I want to see happen in life, but I very rarely am imposing what I want to see happen in the election outcomes. I'm pretty straightforward with you guys about what you're looking at. And it's funny because that sometimes paints you into a corner of, don't shoot the messenger when you say these kind of things. I said the Biden administration / Harris administration would lose in 2024, not because I wanted them to, but because I knew their platform was trash. And I said that Maria Lazar was going to take a beating. And I'm here to tell you right now, whatever Democrat comes out of the 2026 governor's primary right now is on the inside track to be able to win statewide, regardless of policy. Like, that's what I think people need to come to grips with. People are scared, they are broke, and they are confused. And they are looking for anybody that can come through and deliver for them in a way that is actually tangible. This economy is strangling people right now. We're going to get into it in the next segment. There are people clapping for the fact that a barrel of oil went down to $95-ish per barrel. It's like, oh, look at that. We already lost 18% of the cost, and you panicans were worried. Yeah, great. It's still 50% more expensive than it was a month and a half ago because our president started a war that he couldn't win. There are people that see this for what it is, and they are angry. This is not the first Supreme Court race that has gone deeply blue. It's actually the third race that has done so just in my tenure out here, 23, 25, and now 26. But what we have seen is a growing chasm every single time there is a spring election, growing larger and larger. And I'd argue that that's brought about by disenfranchisement. Politics is no longer about driving out the largest number of voters that you see. I feel like 2020 might be the largest electoral turnout that we see for the foreseeable future. I doubt we hit it in 28, and realistically, I'd be surprised if we hit it in 32. I think there are a laundry list of Democrats that are angry with the Democratic Party. And now what's happening is MAGA dead enders are where I was when you first met me in 2022. when Democrats had the House and the Senate and the presidency, and I really didn't see the kind of economic reform that you would think an opposition party would bring to the table once they had controls of all the levers. What MAGA Republicans are dealing with today is that exact same reality, getting those levers to be in their control. Some of them wanted stupid crap like a mighty white nation, but a lot of them just wanted the kind of economic reforms that I talk about every single day on this show. The fact is, the GOP has been out of step with what the people of Wisconsin want, and since Trump won, they've been out of step with what the country wants. Pick a referendum. It passed yesterday in terms of school funding, whether it's Appleton, Menasha, the list goes on and on. They're all available at the WBAY website. You can go ahead and read them for yourself there. I'm not going to rattle them all off. All of them won. Some of them were by the hair on their chinny chin chin, and others were absolute blowouts. But the fact is, they all won because people want to see their public schools funded. And some of those races were not even close. It's almost like maybe we should just go through the traditional levers of funding public schools instead of making people vote for it every single year for political reasons. These are not my opinions. I am taking the data. I am taking the votes that took place yesterday, the votes that have been taking place across the country, and I am just presenting the data through one of the only lenses that makes sense. We've had somebody waiting on hold here for a while. I see we have a couple texts as well, 920-281-1150, 920-281-1150. We'll take the call first, and we'll read some comments here. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Hey, Ben. Well, I'm not usually a one-issue voter when it comes to any kind of election, especially the Supreme Court. But with the Lazar candidate who is totally anti-women's rights, I think as a woman, I could not vote for a woman who wants to take womanly rights away from me. So she didn't even have so much as a prayer with me.
I think there's a lot of people that felt the same way you did, Cindy, and I appreciate the call. And I've expressed, not that I don't care about it, but there is an element of 1.8 of people get an abortion throughout their life. Not to say it doesn't matter, not to say it's not relevant, but 1.8, it's a 1.8% of the population conversation. And what the GOP in Wisconsin has had to deal with is essentially the equivalent of if Democrats had all of the levers and then started like removing guns rights one right at a time and didn't make it full-blown illegal to own a gun, but you always felt like, we're just about on the precipice of not being able to do this anymore. And if we don't get our crap together quick, we're going to lose. That's kind of the attitude that Cindy exemplified there and that I have found exemplified by women all across this state. And they absolutely, specifically in the Supreme Court races, that has absolutely been on the forefront of a lot of people's minds while they're voting. Maria Lazar said in the debate that she was in favor of a 20-week ban, but also, every other Supreme Court justice on the U.S. Supreme Court said that Roe v. Wade wasn't on the chopping block. And so if you're expecting women who care about this issue to trust a conservative justice just because they said they're not going to do anything about it, you've kind of burned that bridge, right? It's kind of like how MAGA and GOP members will bring up the fact that Obama lied about being able to keep your doctor. That was like 15, 16 years ago, and yet it is still brought up as Donald Trump lies every single day about something new. It's like, oh, well, what about when Obama said you can keep your doctor? There are certain things that people will hold on to forever. The abortion conversation, right? And I understand why. The abortion conversation is going to be that thing for the foreseeable future, and there really isn't a way around that. Ben just simply says GTFO. Fair enough. That's the reality of the situation, my man. What do we have here? Jeremani says the poll workers cheered for my child voting in their first election. It was great. That's absolutely awesome. I love that for you. Sterline says with all the local races last night, let's point out the former Winnebago exec John Damel lost his race to get on the board. Larry Dutton says, or I shouldn't have said your last name. I apologize, Larry. I just read what I see sometimes. I'm on autopilot. We are now mirroring the 2022 midterms. Just swapped out Dems for GOP. In a lot of ways, yes, you're exactly right. But the Democrats, as I mentioned yesterday, were able to stem some of that red wave tide in 2022 by doing the stuff with student loans right before the election started. So it's not apples to apples, but this vote yesterday it exemplifies a disenfranchisement. It's not liberals winning, it's Republicans losing is what we are watching happen in this state and across this country. In Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene's district was up for a special election. It was a plus 37 Trump district. And the person running in that district, I'm blanking on the name, I don't have it in front of me, ended up only winning by 14. Still a beatdown, but that's a 23-point shift towards the liberal side of things. And when you don't have a 37-point cushion, it's going to be pretty difficult to absorb that kind of blow over time. There is, the writing is on the wall. I am not saying this stuff because it's what I think. I am not saying this stuff because it's what I want to happen. Just like I wasn't doing that in 2024. I am good at reading the tea leaves. I have friends across the political aisle. I am out in the community quite a bit. I listen to people talk. I scour social media networks to see how people are talking about certain decisions. And when you ingest all this information and I run it through the process that I do, it's fairly easy to predict what's going to end up happening. I joke that I live in the future, but prove me wrong. Kristen says access to HRT and therapies for women and men. Oh, okay. When it comes to abortion, it's so much more than that. It's all reproductive rights, access to birth control, women's health care, HRT, and therapies for women in menopause. Absolutely. And again, I'm not minimizing why that matters. But I'm also, I guess where I pause is because I'm very big on if the Democrats want to really capitalize on frustration right now coming from the Republican right, it seems to me like they are more than happy to just slink into the shadows and allow MAGA to just completely implode in on itself. Rather than actually presenting a platform that a majority of people can get behind. It's why I would play clips for you guys of Mamdani and Plattner. And if Francesca Hong comes out of this primary, I have a feeling she's going to have a couple of those clips as well. But actual leftists that are interested in trying to push forward a message that people actually care about, that would bring in a kind of coalition that if you deliver, could secure power for the next 20 years. Republicans have the opportunity to do that right now, and they squandered it. They used this time to pass tax cuts for wealthy people, make life miserable for minorities, and literally nothing else. And it's not on me to pretend that, there's a lot of credence behind that move. No, it was a stupid idea, and objectively, nothing has gotten better. The Supreme Court is going to have nothing to do with the cost of living. But if you've actually ever met the median voter, it doesn't matter that it has nothing to do with the cost of living. That's the way this kind of stuff works. It's a difficult reality to live with, but the fact is, even though Maria Lazar tried to distance herself from Trump, and I think that was a strategy, I believe that was the intention, was to distance from Trump because he is so unpopular right now. What that does is that suppresses Republicans from voting. And so when you look at the number of people that ended up showing up, that's how you get the outcomes that you saw today. But I hear what you're saying, Kristen, and I couldn't agree with you more. I do understand that process. Phil says, enjoy the show. Wondering if you heard any numbers regarding voter turnout in our area yesterday. Just curious. Please be to Allah. I'll tell you what, I'll look that up during the commercial break. I don't have the exact number, but everywhere is down. Every single part of the state is down. But if you missed the beginning part of the show, in terms of trends, in terms of the way things were going, county by county, this is a shift towards the Democrats of plus 33, 32, 31, 29, 29, 28, 28, 28, 28, 28, 27, 27, 26. This is county by county. Trempealeau. I don't know how to say that first one. Richland, Lafayette, Polk, La Crosse, Chippewa, Portage, Vernon, Juneau, Buffalo, Marionette, Aconto, Bayfield, Wapaka, Iowa, every single one of these counties, 25 plus points in shifts towards the Democrat. Not because she was a uniquely great candidate, not because they brought something to the table that we've never seen before. This is a reflection of how people feel about GOP politics right now. DSL says the school referendums were surprising to me. I guess pulling on heartstrings is a winner. You don't want to be the bad guy, but we're funding more failure. Cut superintendents, boards, and administration that won't change the curriculum that's failing our children. More money, no changes, same results. Maybe it's a little bit of heartstrings, DSL. I'd also argue that the turnout for the Democratic Supreme Court justice probably impacted the referendum voting quite a bit as well, right? Because that's kind of what I think what tipped the scales. There was one county, and I apologize, I should have it in front of me. It's available on the WBAY website, but I don't have it up on my screen here. The final vote was like 50.2 to 49.8. That's the kind of referendum that probably could flip in a more competitive top of the ticket race that did not exist. Much like how Kamala Harris's failures resulted in the GOP taking over a larger percentage of the Senate than expected, I think the referendums were the beneficiary of a lackluster top of the ticket for the GOP this time around. That's just my opinion, of course. But if anybody else has any other thoughts on the matter here, I welcome the show. We have Clean and Sober Nation on my YouTube channel saying the midterms are going to be a bloodbath for Republicans. Yeah, I've been predicting that for a while now. And again, not because of Democratic strength, because of Republican weakness. And I think that's guaranteed. That is absolutely where it's ultimately headed. I think you're exactly right. You can already see on my social feeds, there's already an effort to kind of kick into gear regarding getting Tom Tiffany on everybody's mind to make sure that the GOP actually shows up for the elections in November. And what's funny is that my feed has been nothing but blue MAGA Dems condemning people like me for not showing up in November of 24. They're like, oh, if only you showed up to vote for Harris, you wouldn't be dealing with what Trump's doing now. Unfortunately, she couldn't pass your little purity test. And now you see right-wing media across Wisconsin saying, I hope you're happy. Now we have a liberal majority until 2030, verbatim, because you won't get off your lazy asses and go and vote. They're yelling at the voting base, something that liberals were doing in 2024, instead of getting mad that they don't have the candidates that inspire people to show up and vote. I realize there is no primary for Supreme Court cases, or for Supreme Court justices, so this isn't apples to apples, but the principle still applies. Don't yell at the voters. Yell at the people who are not inspired. Yell at the people who are wondering how they're going to pay their rent because Donald Trump has done nothing but make life more expensive. Yell at the Gen Zers who actually showed a trend towards the GOP, but the Zoomers, the Gen Zers that were trending towards GOP that didn't see the housing market decrease in cost, so they decided not to show up. Like, it's not the fault of the voters that they're not inspired by Kamala Harris and her lackluster pushback against genocide. It is not the fault of the voters that Donald Trump said no new wars, and now he's starting wars as costs shoot through the roof. And then the GOP's like, come and keep voting for us. Otherwise, what? What's going to get worse? 920-281-1150. What do we have here? I'm one of those idiots that voted for Trump in 2024, and I totally regret it. Piss poor judgment on my part. Sorry, America. Nah, that crap happens. I voted for Kamala Harris, and I still hate myself. So I don't think there is a right answer in 2024. I'm going to be honest with you. I think no matter who we voted for, we were on this trajectory. But until the people that voted, much like you, Clean and Sober Nation, kind of admit, like, okay, no, this sucks. I don't want to take part in this anymore. As long as there's people willing to pretend that what MAGA's doing is good or right, then liberals will be able to continue hiding behind lackluster messaging. So it's a matter of ousting the absolute trash and then cracking down on the people that are pretending like they are your friend. Larry says, if nothing changes, we'll be voting for someone other than a Dem. I feel that. I feel that. I have a feeling. I'm telling you right now, 2028's light years away. But I'll tell you right now, there's I have a feeling that neither party actually has their candidate right now. Everyone's acting like it's very obviously Vance and Marco, and people are like, "Oh, Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket." I have a feeling none of those four are going to end up being in this. But this is the canary in the coal mine, guys. It's only going to continue trending this way from here. I've got a lot more to say about this, but we got to squeeze a break in here. 920-281-1150, 920-281-1150. We're going to switch gears. We're going to get into the world of national politics and international politics on the other side. We've got a ceasefire in Iran for the next 2 weeks. Who could have seen it coming, except for everybody? We'll jump into that on the other side. For the record, I am happy about that. Let's stop with the taco Trump BS. Like, I don't want him doing a genocide in Iran. So, like, let's pump the brakes on that noise and let's get to something that makes let's get to something a little more peaceful here. We'll jump into that on the other side. Stay right where you are. Outside the box, WHBY. Listen, Wisconsin, we're not warm yet, but melting days and freezing nights mean water is on the move and your sump pump is about to get busy. Water damage is one of the top reasons homeowners file insurance claims, so do yourself a favor and avoid the headache. Test your sump pump today. Call or text Tim Roush and his team. Just use that free text line that I've been telling you about. They can help keep your basement dry and protected. Head to timroushplumbing.com for that text line and more info. That's Roush Plumbing, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. Shell out in Wrightstown says Marie Lazar was at an Allegheny County Republican function held in a bowling alley in Kaukauna. She could not be bothered to meet and greet the parents and grandparents watching their children and grandchildren bowl. I used to go door to door for candidates, so I know how important meeting the people are. Not surprised she lost. Honest to God, I think she was dead in the water. I think had she embraced Trump and the MAGA movement, she would have done better than what she did. But I think there was no. I think it still would have reflected the Crawford versus Schimmel race of 2025. And the GOP very loudly online is calling for, I should say the voters rather, are calling for Brian Schimming, the head of the Wisconsin GOP, to resign. There are a lot of people frustrated by what they saw yesterday, just a complete lack of interest in turnout for the candidate. And Michelle says, Ben, you're exactly right. My greatest fear is that things are so bad right now, the Dems will be able to get on with a bunch of do-nothings. So hoping for a legit third party. I'm right there with you, because the trend that I see this on, Michelle, is that it's going to end up being some kind of Gavin Newsom or something, and that assuming there's not some kind of massive pivot in policy coming from the Republican right, should be a pretty safe and cushy victory for the Democrats, because people will be wanting change again. And then he will be painted as a far left extremist while governing as a center right Republican. And then we're going to end up with some kind of even deeper hole with some kind of Trump-esque candidate in 2032 if Democrats don't pull their crap together now. I saw in my YouTube chat somebody asking me about Josh Shapiro, and I funnel him into the same category. I'll be honest, I think the AIPAC albatross is going to weigh heavily on a lot of presidential hopefuls. 80% of Democrats now have a negative attitude towards AIPAC, and it's starting to seem like anybody taking that funding is going to feel that for the foreseeable future here. We got a couple of calls piling up here. Someone literally just called. I'm going to put them on hold, and someone's been here for about a minute or so. Hello, you're on Outside the Box. Hello.
Hello, Ben.
Yeah, hey, how are you?
Yeah, Gary calling. Jay, I just looked at your website regarding the school referendum in northeastern Wisconsin. I don't know about this, statewide, how they all panned out, but I think you kind of have to do a deeper dive on interpreting some of the results. It is a spring election. Turnout is not the same as
Absolutely.
the fall.
Absolutely.
But I noticed a trend. I was surprised in Menasha that one passed, and also Appleton. The length of those referendum there was such a variation, and there was a big difference. Even when you account for the population size of the different school districts, and then when you look at rural and so forth. I looked at Swamico, for example. That's Bayport. That's a growing area, so. Yeah, bingo, they passed that. But the cost per capita in the different districts was quite a variation there, and there was still the trend that the heavily Republican rural areas, for the most part, shot it down, like Lena, Gillette, Marinette, those areas, Oconto. You had a few sprinkles of passage in Wapaka and Clintonville, I guess, and I think Marcus Sand shot it down, which is heavily Republican, conservative, I'll say. Southern Door, that's a weird one too. But Fond du Lac shot theirs down pretty dramatically, and of course, they've been taking a heavy job hit over there with the machining and the layoffs in Fond du Lac, which was not surprising. I didn't see anything about Oshkosh. I don't know, maybe they didn't have one. But Appleton, holy criminy, you had like a 5-year obligation, and $60 million or something. And it was like, wow, overall. And it's like,
sure. I'm glad you gave me
there was such a variation, and then you had Brilliant going down, which is pretty conservative. If you look at the cost per capita, and you look at the previous history of how those people voted, I don't think there was a wide change in how people voted for that school stuff. But I will say they wouldn't have that problem if they had funded that at 2/3 level, like when Mike Ellis promised that back years ago, chairman of the finance committee, joint finance, they were going to fund school services. Now they got to go to these referendums every 2 years, 4 years, 6
Exactly, and they keep seeming to pass there, Gary, and I couldn't agree with you more, and I appreciate you keeping me honest. The WBAY website, it flipped the yes and no for Fond du Lac, so I was just scouring it, but as I look at it now, yeah, it failed 50.8 to 49.2. So thank you for that, and I appreciate the call, but exactly, and that's kind of what I was highlighting there in the first part of the segment. Clearly, the people want this funding because it passes so starkly in so many different places. It's kind of hard to ignore. We got another call. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Yeah, Ben, thanks for your service again. John here.
Yeah, what's up, man?
So, the school funding formula, as a former school board member, the school funding formula has been broken since the 90s. We need to really take it on concretely and seriously, just like we need to take on global warming and pollution by overturning this state law that bans municipalities from banning single-use plastic bags. That has to go as well. As it concerns the future, Ben, you had a great guest on a while ago from Indivisible, the candidate who's running for US 8 against Mr. Weed. You had her on, and she's awesome, and I've heard her speak. And I would encourage everybody to dive into what indivisible actions are happening in and around the Fox Valley area. I'll be at some of them, given my work commitments. I'm going to make as many of those as I can, because socialism is not a bad thing. It's really a people up movement that is meant to even the playing field for all Americans with the world. And we need to confront that reality too. So thank you for interviewing her, and keep up the attention on socialism and indivisible activities. Okay?
Yeah, of course. Thanks a lot, John, and I appreciate that very much. And I mean, the fact of the matter is that he's exactly right. Like, socialism is a bad word until Donald Trump wants to increase defense spending by 1.5 million, and then all of a sudden government-funded programs are just the bee's knees. It's a remarkable reality, and I appreciate the kind words from John there. We're going to switch gears. I only have about 8 or 9 minutes to get into the Iran thing here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on it from an opinion standpoint before we bring the professors in the 10 o'clock hour. Sharon, to kick us off in the email line, says, I'm glad Trump did not start a constitutional crisis that would have occurred if in our armed forces when they would refuse to drop a nuclear weapon. However, if you read the 10 points, it's basically carte blanche for Iran to do what they want. Some of the items that were negated date back to George H.W. Bush regime. I suspect he was getting heat on a number of fronts, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Middle Eastern countries warned him they would pull any construction contracts if he went through with his threats. Well, that's just it, Sharon. And I have to choose my words carefully here, because as I stated, I'm seeing a lot of, and you even named, you put in the subject line for the email, taco, which, taco Trump always chickens out, which was a thing that Chuck Schumer was saying specifically about Iran about a year ago. And I was like, look, this right here is exactly why Democrats lose, is because you're trying to push, not you, Sharon, the Democrats are trying to push Trump further to the right on wartime activities, specifically in Iran. And it kind of ties in with the electoral politics that I was discussing in the last segment. There has not been the full-throated condemnation of what Donald Trump has been doing in Iran that is necessary. And I'll be honest, I watched Fox News for a little bit yesterday after the announcement, and they were bragging about how our big-brained 5D chess president got us out of another mess that he created. You turn on MSNBC, and it was just a bunch of chickens with their head cut off, running around talking about how the president doesn't know what he's doing, which arguably you could probably prove through a number of different rationales there. Lindsey Graham was on TV. I actually pulled the audio. Here he was after he decided after he heard that Trump was not going to genocide Iran. It's always good to hear from Lindsay about matters like that. But for the rest of us, so I went to CNN to see how they were covering it. And they were absolutely devastated that it didn't go far enough. They brought on neocon after neocon after neocon, pro-warmonger after pro-warmonger after pro-warmonger, talking about this 10-point plan, which, by the way, we jumped into the 10-point plan yesterday. New York Times had it yesterday, but I've been sitting on that for the better part of 72 hours. It was first reported by Drop Site News, and it didn't make its way into the mainstream until well later, into the almost 48 hours after it was actually available. And he did. He essentially said, we're going to take these 10 points that we jumped into on the program yesterday, and we're going to use those as a starting point. Now, he's not saying that all of them are going to happen the way that they are listed in that particular list, but he is saying that that is going to be the basis for deciding these kind of things. Nobody living in reality sees this as us being in a better position. As I mentioned in the last segment, the cost of a barrel of oil went down to a roughly $95 per barrel, which is still about 50% more expensive than it was a month and a half ago. It is now going to be a $2 million surcharge per ship going through the Strait of Hormuz. Realistically, the Strait of Hormuz was not owned by anybody. It was not controlled by anybody during prior to Donald Trump's involvement with the area. So the idea that it would reopen with a new charge going to the country of Iran, and that is somehow a net positive, I'm here to tell you right now, after I saw how so many people reacted to Barack Obama giving Iran $1.7 billion of their own money in a consistent world, Republican heads should be exploding right now. Of course, when you listen to them talk, oh, well, what he was actually doing was the Strait of Hormuz impacted China, and by playing this game, he was impacting China's economy, and you liberals just don't get it. But for the rest of us that have more than 3 IQ points to be able to rub together, the president got fleeced here. He absolutely was taken on the runaround, and there is absolutely no other interpretation of what happened. I am thrilled he decided not to literally become Hitler. I think this would have been the final step for like, oh no, Donald Trump actually is Hitler. But thankfully, he didn't decide to actually go through with that, as we heard from the last call there, because he probably was hearing about it from allies and people around the area, and you cannot act this way. But it still leaves a lot to be desired, and we are inarguably in a worse position than we were 6 weeks ago. Oh, and did I mention there's a cost of living crisis? Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Hey, Ben. I am sad to report that the Strait of Hormuz is closed because Israel has not stopped bombing Lebanon.
Well, yeah.
And that was part of the agreement with Pakistan set up. It included Lebanon, and not y'all say no, it doesn't. And I sent you the text the other day. They destroyed a 70,000-year-old village. So the Strait of Hormuz is closed.
Oh, and I saw they blew up a synagogue as well. And I don't want to play the whataboutism game, but you know as well as I do, when there is an act of violence in a synagogue in America, it is a 24-hour anti-Semitism is on the rise segment. And then that happens, and unless you use outside sources, you wouldn't even know that it happened.
And what I want to say about that is, you know, I've looked at the history of all the things that happened, why Muslims left Arab countries. In Iraq in particular, the Irgun went in and was blowing up Jewish businesses to scare people to death, and many of them fled to Iraq. King Mohammed in Morocco didn't want Jews to leave. You know, he forbid any acts against Jews. Things were done there to terrorize people to go to Israel. But this, and one of the rabbis that was there, he said the Zionists don't care about anything.
the synagogue is destroyed.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I have less than 90 seconds, and I want to add to your point, so I appreciate the call and in the input there. Thank you very much, Cynthia. But I also would like to highlight on top of what Cynthia's saying, I do not think that Netanyahu or the IDF or Israel is going to be able to pull the strings much further. There is so much American resentment right now. As I've highlighted, the only demographic of people that still have a favorable view of Israel is 50-year-old white men that vote Republican. Pick any other demographic, in best case scenario, it's 50-50. Not out of hatred, but because we have enough problems on our own here. There is a strong feeling that we were pulled into this conflict by Israel, seen as at the beginning of the conflict, we heard Trump and Lil Marco say as much. And as Trump has now pushed for this ceasefire, you're seeing the reaction online already that a lot of people in Israel are livid that Trump is bailing right now, but the people in America are happy about it. And after what we saw electorally yesterday here in Wisconsin, to paraphrase Denzel Washington in Training Day, you want to win or you want to go home? Trump's choosing he wants to try and win right now. I don't think they're going to be able to change that mind. We have to get out of here. I ran a little long. We will have the professors coming up. We'll keep the conversation rolling. Outside the Box, WHBY. And we're back to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY and Political Voices Network. Outside the Box is brought to you by Roush Plumbing and Remodeling, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. If you're just joining us, we really didn't have a lot to talk about, so I just hemmed and hawed for about an hour there. I'm joking, of course. We have election results. We have a ceasefire allegedly in Iran for at least the next 2 weeks. We covered it from my perspective. Now, of course, it is a Professor's Wednesday. We're going to double down on some of these topics here. And I got to say, just based on the way the conversation was going off the air, I think you guys will be interested in a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here. We have, for the first time in 6 weeks, both Jerry Podair and Arnold Schober in the Myron Construction Studio with me. How are you guys doing today?
Very good. I'm back from California, and what is this substance that's falling from the sky?
Yeah,
Do they call that rain?
Yeah, are you familiar?
Not really familiar with it.
Yeah, no, it's pretty lame.
Yeah.
We have scheduled some snow for you also, Jerry.
Well,
so.
thank you. Thank you. I had forgotten what that was also.
Mixed with 60s and 50s, only in Wisconsin, ladies and gentlemen. Only in Wisconsin.
And then a snowstorm 3 days later. I did miss the 27 inches, although I was getting all sorts of photographs from colleagues and friends back here. It was a good time to be in California. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, that's the understatement of the century there. And of course, Arnold, always good to have you back in the building. We had you quarantined away for a while, trying some new filming measures, but I was getting lonely when we would do the segments, so I figured I'd invite you guys in here. I see the YouTube stream is popping off. I'm going to get Kevin. I see you messaging. I'll hit you up during the break here. We are going to keep this conversation rolling, though, surrounding the Supreme Court and a number of other elections as well. But we should probably start with the big one here, guys. We do this conversation every time. At this point, we know it's a partisan race. They're democratically lined. Even, I don't know if you noticed, I was following along on the New York Times. They used to do the Wisconsin Supreme Court races in purple and yellow to avoid partisanship. It was blue and red yesterday. So they have dropped all pretenses that this is not, in fact, a partisan race.
And you know what really struck me, and I just have problems getting used to this. The other liberal Supreme Court justices were at Taylor headquarters, cheering her on. She shouted out to them in her acceptance speech. This would be like the 4 conservative justices in the U.S. Supreme Court, assuming we had elections, being in the headquarters of the winning candidate. There's just something about this, the partisanship now, the open partisanship with these Supreme Court races, that's a little disconcerting to me, but I'm old-fashioned.
Yeah. Arnold, we know. Hit me with it. Hit me with it, Arnold.
You know what I think. So I was, in fact, ranting to my class about how terrible it is to elect justices at all.
Yeah.
And that, in my opinion, we should work it like the Federal Appeals Circuit, where your case is heard by a random selection of justices. So those justices are appointed so we could elect them, right? But then you'd have a subset randomly selected, because that would do 2 things. One, the justices would have a whole lot less incentive to run on a partisan platform, right? Because who knows if they're going to hear your case. And 2, you as a lawyer can't prepare for Alito or Jackson or whoever. You just have to say, I've got to look at the law. And I think that would be much easier to be impartial instead of kind of claiming to be impartial, but really being in the bag.
You know, when I was practicing law, you sort of brought up a memory for me. We would actually wonder about, the judges or the justices' names were picked out of a box, basically, and the box got spun like a lottery box or something, and you never knew who you were going to come up with.
And so I think, because, as Jerry mentioned, this is starting to look really unseemly to me, is like, this isn't a third branch of the legislature. If it is, we need to cut their court terms to like 3 years.
Yeah, right.
And but if it's a court, it needs to be impartial and it needs to be blind, right? As the statutes have it, and that means maybe the lawyers and the public doesn't know who hears a case until it comes up.
Yeah, and like, I'm just sitting here almost slack-jawed listening to you guys, because there's an element, and I realize you got to work with the system you have in place, with the parts that you have in place, and at the same time, these are some life-altering ramifications. Like, you're talking whether it's a criminal case or whatever, and it's almost potluck, and it's the same laws, and the idea that it can be so vastly interpreted differently, and we just kind of roll with that, I think highlights a pretty awful problem that I most certainly don't have a solution for here. But I do have to ask you guys, so you kind of bring up different systems here, Arnold. You're watching people right now. There's a frustration because, as we were talking about during the commercial break, spring elections are no longer a safe space for the Conservative Party. It's actually become a much more liberal dominated election period. You're seeing people float the idea of moving the elections for Supreme Court to November so that more people get involved in it, are aware that it's happening. You get a more inclusive approach here. There comes a time when you have to game the system like this. It does bring up a lot of calls for concern. But I do have to ask, do you think it's a matter of it being a spring election? Is this a matter of Wisconsin maybe not necessarily being as purple of a state, at least for Supreme Court justices, as it once was? It seems like almost, I've only been here for 3.5 years. This feels like 15 years of pent-up frustration since the Scott Walker era kind of all being piled onto the Supreme Court right now. Do you think there's any validity to that? Is this Donald Trump backlash? What do you think resulted in a 20-point swing for this race here?
So I think there's a couple things going on. First, there is really good, really solid research on timing of elections and who turns out. So this isn't unique to Wisconsin. School boards are often elected in odd times, Februarys and Aprils and Mays, when nobody else is, oh, there's an election, it's February kind of thing. We sometimes do that here in this state. And that changes very much who turns out to vote. I think that's one reason why we have a different electorate for Supreme Court races here in an April election versus a November election. In the old days, like pre-Trump, Republican voters were much higher propensity voters. They're much more likely to turn out to vote all the time, right? If there's an election, I'm going to go out and vote. That has switched in that today, Democratic voters, partly because the Democrats have become the party of elites as much as they don't believe it, they're more likely to turn out to vote all the time. And we see this in Wisconsin that come November next year, we're going to, I don't predict, right?
Yeah.
But I would expect a very close election in Wisconsin, 50-50-ish. Whereas these off elections are going to be much more heavily dominated on the left because high propensity Democrats, chiefly in Dane County, if you look at the map, they turn out very high levels all the time, are dominating the off-cycle elections. So we've got two electorates in Wisconsin, the one that turns out for quote-unquote big elections, and then the people who vote all the time. And that nowadays favors the Democrats rather than the Republicans like it did in the past.
And Jerry, I want to go to you on Dane County in a second, but Arnold, just to follow up, just because there's been 30 special elections that have flipped Democrat, do you think that the logic you just applied there for Wisconsin might be a little bit more applicable nationwide as well? Or do you think it's more of a trend developing as the party in power oftentimes sees that pendulum swing the other way? Which one of those do you think is more accurate there?
I think both of them, to split the difference here. First, I mean, Democrats have become more high propensity voters across the country. This isn't unique to Wisconsin. But also, just forever, it's been that the out of power party, those voters are more energized. It's like, oh, we've got to take back America, right? From the other evil party, right? That's not anything new. And so you do see a lot more pushback on when the other party is in power. And Donald Trump, right, isn't particularly doing favors for the Republicans. And so that you can add that into the mix and you have a compounded effect.
Yeah, Jerry, you've been highlighting the wow. Oh, go ahead. If you had thoughts on that, go for it. Yeah.
One of the things that I've been noticing, and this again is impressionistic, is that liberals recently are starting to concentrate on what I call the judicial grassroots. In other words, they are focusing on electing district attorneys who agree with their philosophy. Clearly, we see this also in terms of Wisconsin Supreme Court races. Liberals are starting to focus on the way the judiciary system operates. And again, as Arnie says, being elites and often elitists, this is something that they, in a sense, have the luxury to focus on. This is sometimes, I think, what more educated voters can focus on. So I think that's what we're seeing as well. These judicially oriented, whether they're DAs or judges, these elections, liberals are concentrating on them. Liberals are interested in them. And I think that's what we're seeing here in Wisconsin, because liberals have now won, 4 straight Supreme Court elections.
Yeah.
And certainly on the grassroots in so many cities, we see these, the appellation of the Soros-backed district attorney, and we see that all over the country. We see it in New York and Philadelphia, and at least for a while in San Francisco, and in Los Angeles again for a while. So that's what we're seeing, and I think that can possibly explain these results that we're seeing, not just here in Wisconsin, but all over the country.
And I think too, the focus on courts comes from that frustration, Ben, that you were mentioning, is that the electoral process is messy, and sometimes you lose, and you can't, like, why do people vote for from the Democrats' point of view, why do people vote for Trump? Well, we can deal with this in a significant way by using the court system, because it's hard to mess with the courts. If there's a court decision, it takes a lot of work to kind of get that out of the system if it goes against you. And so I think this is an option for Democrats to say, well, this is a way to protect ourselves, protect the country, right, from someone like Trump. Right? Should there be another one after he leaves office? Isn't so? I think that's some of the issue as well. Is that this seems to be a way to make the system do what they want it to do, without having to worry about elections. So it's like,
you can't go wrong with "no one is above the law," and we hear that constantly, almost as a mantra. So that's where the judicial system comes into play. No one is above the law. You can't really argue with that.
Yeah,
obviously, and that's why I think, especially liberals now, are oriented towards the judicial system, or control of the judicial system.
Well, it's funny because even as someone who was more of an outside observer in the early 2010s, right after I graduated college, the one thing you knew is Mitch McConnell's really good at getting judges appointed. And this almost feels like it's trying to counteract that kind of reaction, mixed with, and I'm not saying it's fair, and I said as much on election day, there's people worried about Trump trying to steal 2028. They saw the Supreme Court go 4-3, and then, like, in order of not overturning the election, they're worried about the 1849 abortion ban, and they show up and vote. As we stated, and Jerry, you have the notes in front of you there, Dane County is the only county that showed up like there was a president on the ballot this year round. Compare that to the WOW counties, where it looks like they forgot, that being, of course, Ozaukee, Washington, and Waukesha. Almost like they forgot there was an election here. You've got some info there in front of you.
But you know what struck me last night, I was just taking notes. Dane County beat Waukesha County last night. And that's really the way this state shakes out. And also, Planned Parenthood beat Act 10. We had a supporter of Planned Parenthood, Taylor, who worked for Planned Parenthood. We have a supporter of Act 10, Lazar, who actually tried to defend Act 10 as an assistant attorney general for Scott Walker. So Wisconsinites made obviously a choice of Supreme Court justice, but they also made a philosophical choice last night. Dane County and Waukesha County are literally on the opposite ends of the philosophical spectrum politically here in this state. And if Dane County wins, Waukesha County loses. And obviously Planned Parenthood versus Act 10, those are the symbolic philosophical lodestars of the left and the right here in Wisconsin. And Planned Parenthood won last night.
Well, I said if you went in a lab and tried to make a caricature of a Democrat for a Republican to run against, I don't know that you would have done a better job than just putting Chris Taylor up there, involved with Planned Parenthood, a legislature, and one of the most. Francesca Hong is the representative in the district that she used to represent. It seemed like such a guarantee. And then meanwhile, you talk about the WOW counties. Ozaukee went +8 for Taylor, which is statistically speaking, it seems like it's just been since 1999. I think anything like that has happened. It's just been a very strange one.
It also depends on where do you want to spend your money. If you're Republicans or Democrats, Taylor raised $6 million, Lazar less than $1 million. And it's pretty clear that nationally, Republicans pretty much wrote this one off. So that if they wanted to concentrate on it, maybe the race would have been closer, but they wrote it off. And basically, I think conservatives or Republicans are writing off the Supreme Court because we've got another conservative justice retiring next year, Ziegler. And it's basic, and I think she basically said, I don't want to be a minority, a 5-2 for the next 10 years. So I'm just going to quit and do something more productive with my life.
Yeah.
So I think the Republicans are pretty much riding off the court.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. There were other elections yesterday as well, and Arnold actually filled me in on some stats here about referendums. Typically 2/3 of them pass. Yesterday was closer to half, statistically, not exactly, but thereabouts. Do you think that's a greater through line? And I was talking about it. I said, clearly there's an interest in funding schools, but when you have to come back every 2 years, ask for more money. We had one texter in the first hour say, the results really aren't there, and now we're funneling more money into this, and there's some consternation there as well. Do you think that is a trend of, what is it, close to a decade and a half of referendum funding? Is it starting to become less popular? You think this was a one-off, or I guess how do you interpret the breakdown there?
School referendums are really a caricature, to use the word again, of the mantra that all politics are local. There's a lot of local issues wrapped up in referenda. And so while nationally about 2/3 of referenda pass for schools in particular, how a school district portrays itself, what people think of their local superintendent, how loud and out there the school board is, how much controversy there is, goes a lot more to explain referenda results, I think, than kind of a national trend. Although there's, as you mentioned earlier, a little bit of a partisan tinge to these, that's not necessarily always the case.
Sure.
Particularly if a district, so like Appleton here, where we're sitting, talked a lot about rising healthcare costs, which has hit a lot of people other than the school district as well. And so they don't seem to be asking for outlandish things. And so I think that goes something to explain. If I'm sitting in the school referenda world, I'm not going to worry about kind of a statistic like only half. Well, of course I would if I'm the consultant, but if I'm not the consultant, half of them passing versus 2/3 of them passing. If that happened next year again, I'd say, there's something we need to think about. But I think given the way that, especially the larger districts, which ask for more money, right, they've been able to present themselves as kind of at the mercy of costs out of their control, as opposed to let's hire 500 more administrators or something, or more likely 20 more administrators.
Yeah,
which would be a much harder sell.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Right. And there's always the split, the traditional split between younger and older voters in these school referendums, parents with children in the school systems versus older citizens who are completely out. Basically, their children are out, they're out, and they're saying, "Well, why should I spend this money? It could go to some purpose that would actually help me."
Mm-hmm.
And that's always seemed to me to be the traditional split, but I think even that is breaking down now.
Yeah, it sounds about right. I feel like it also matters if your kids are in school still, and that'll impact how you feel about it as well. It's funny how that works. Jerry, real quick, Amanda says in the text line, as a practicing criminal attorney, a huge part of my job is knowing how to argue two different judges at every level, the municipal, the trial court, and on up. Is that a pretty shared experience from your time?
Yeah, absolutely. You have you dance with who you brung, basically, and you never know. And it's at least in New York State, it really was. They actually spun a wheel with
That's crazy.
Yeah, and they picked I don't think they picked a ball out, but they picked like a slip of paper out, and that's who you got.
Get your lotto numbers,
and you basically had to. I remember once they called it in New York a whole carrying the bag, meaning I was the assistant to a trial attorney, the partner in my law firm, and we ended up with an incredibly prickly, angry judge, a very, very difficult judge. And actually, she was famous. Her name is Constance Baker Motley, and she was a famous civil rights attorney who became a judge and was an excellent judge, but always seemed to be in a bad mood. and the partner I worked for had argued before her in the past, and he said, this is what we have to do here. You never raise your voice. You never, you're always very, very polite, because otherwise she's going to start screaming at us. And so you never know who you're going to get. You never know who you're going to get.
Yeah, no, exactly. The two Utes. Anyway. All right. Great conversation there, guys. Yeah, there it is.
My cousin Vinny, right?
Yeah, there we
The
go.
movie that is on television at least once a day.
Yeah. Hey,
It's
I'm
the
not
My Cousin
complaining.
Vinny's
I'm
channel.
not complaining.
Yeah,
It's one
I'm
of my
not
favorites.
complaining. It is one of the funniest, greatest movies of all time.
Yeah, I almost became a lawyer because of that movie.
Not the Joe Pesci kind of lawyer.
Yeah, of course
Although
not.
he wins in the end.
He's got the unconventional approach, right?
Yeah.
That's all that matters here. All right, let's get into the world. We got to get to commercial break here, but obviously that was the big story in Wisconsin. There's a big story nationwide and realistically worldwide. We're gonna have a different approach to this story though than I think you're gonna get to a lot of places, and I think you guys will enjoy it. But stick around because we got to get a commercial in there first. We'll be back in just a little bit. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos right here on WHBY. We've returned.
I think that was worth the price of admission, right there.
Jerry Poder, Arnold Schober in the Myron Construction Studio with me as we continue moving along on this Wednesday morning here. We just wrapped up our conversation surrounding the Supreme Court race, as well as a number of other elections in Wisconsin. Now we are on to the world of Iran, foreign policy, and the conversation on everybody's mind since essentially the beginning of March here. This was not included in our email chain, but it has to be where we start because quite literally we were going back and forth Monday and Tuesday, not knowing where we would be on Wednesday, as there was an 8 p.m. Tuesday evening deadline set. As we are sitting here now, we are on another 2-week plan. At this point, I'm taking bets. We getting a healthcare plan, or are we getting a ceasefire plan in Iran first? I'll leave that up to you guys. Which one's going to actually get to us first here?
That metallic sound that you just heard was kicking the can down the road.
Exactly. But if it actually is a peaceful can and it results in some kind of plan that everybody can seem to get behind, I'll kick that can as well here. Yeah. So I'll hold my breath until then. And Arnold, I want to start with you because you had an interesting perspective here. We were talking about the rhetoric that was used that obviously captivated quite a bit of the country yesterday. We talked about it quite a bit on the show yesterday, paraphrasing essentially because I don't have the tweet in front of me or the Truth Social post in front of me, the erasing of a civilization or however he phrased it. You had some interesting perspective during the commercial break that you don't necessarily think A, that he meant it, or B, that it was even really his words. And I found that to be a pretty interesting take.
Yeah. So what Trump said, right, is because he was going to kind of wipe a civilization off the face of the earth or something to that effect. I mean, that sounds like really out of place for a leader of the United States to say. We don't expect that kind of rhetoric. But if you listen to kind of Iranian revolutionary rhetoric, so like, whoever the current leader of Iran is, dead or alive, right? Yeah. The kind of rhetoric they employ against the United States is essentially a mirror of what Trump said. We're going to wipe you off the face of the earth. You are the great Satan. This is the end of your line. I mean, you are evil, and we're going to employ kind of nuclear warheads against you. They didn't ever say quite that, but the sense of apocalyptic end was there. All of their messages were laced with this kind of rhetoric. So I have no inside knowledge of the Trump administration, mind you, but my sense, yes, actually, let me give him a call. What my suspicion is that someone said, Trump, this is a way that you can get their attention. You can tell them that I'm going to speak your language. Mm-hmm. I'm going to tell you that I am going to wipe your civilization off the map, like you've been saying about us since 1979. And that may well have been part of, who knows where credit lies, part of the reason the Iranians said, okay, we'll do this. Okay. Because now it sounds like Trump is like seemingly somewhat crazy, but he has been pounding us pretty hard. And if he's starting to talk like us, he means business here. Yeah. So that's a possibility. Now, again, for our ears here in the West, in the United States, this sounds like heinous, right? But if you're talking to a regime that routinely sounds like this, that might be how you have to deal with it.
Right. It's a coded message, and I think there's historical precedent for this. When Secretary of State Henry Kissinger in the early 70s was dealing with North Vietnam at the end of the Vietnam War, he would actually say, my boss, meaning Richard Nixon, is an unstable guy. And he may have even used the word crazy. And you never know what he is going to do. I, Henry Kissinger, am a reasonable person, so deal with me. And I think it's a play on the classic good cop, bad cop that we used to see, what we call good cop, bad cop, what we used to see in criminal procedure, where a suspect is in a room, this is before Miranda, and the bad cop comes in first, and he's screaming and yelling and threatening him, and then the good cop comes in, pulls the bad cop away, just get out of the room, and then sits down with the defendant and says, I can't control this guy. I'm a reasonable guy. You deal with me. I can't control. I don't know what this guy's going to do. So perhaps a confession would be in order here. And I think that is part of, Trump's MO here. He is crazy. He is liable to do anything. Do you really want to roll the dice here? And I think that, at least in part, is the reason that we have a very shaky but hopefully stable two-week reprieve here.
I couldn't help but find myself reflecting on Little Rocket Man.
Yes.
When the post came out, it just feels like a more, because I remember there being a sentiment nationwide during the little, like, what are you doing? He has nukes. Why would you talk about him that way? And like, honest to God, you really don't hear much about North Korea the last 6 years. And it's you think back in when was that, 2018-ish, I think. You think about how every night we were going to bed wondering, is this actually going to happen?
Right.
And
But there is a precedent historically, again, for North Korea, because Bill Clinton was negotiating with them in the 1990s. He was negotiating in good faith. He was negotiating with people who were not in good faith. And what I remember, you guys might be too young for this, but I remember at one point, North Korea basically says, we have nuclear weapons. We were lying to you for the last 5 years. Too bad. Basically, to paraphrase or colloquialize it, that's what they said to Bill Clinton. And the question is, can you negotiate with a totalitarian regime that is outside the rules-based world order that we're always talking about? Iran is outside that rules-based world order. North Korea is outside that rules-based world order, and it makes it very, very hard to trust them and very, very hard to negotiate with them.
Well, I mean, that's a perfect segue. Then we'll
Right.
get into to your angle here, Arnold, surrounding that rules-based order, that world order that we've claimed to have essentially since World War II to kind of exemplify. Now, there will be other countries that would tell you that we have also infringed upon that a handful of times over the course of the last 70
Never.
years here. Yeah, of course not. I actually had some, well, I'm not even going to open that can of worms. But in any event, you seem to think that we might be on the precipice of something new entirely. We were talking off the air, even our own allies kind of aren't necessarily operating with us the same way that they always have. And regardless of how this ends up shaking out, God willing, we deal with peace, but wherever this ends up going, I think we're on the verge of something new here, whatever that is. Could be better, could be worse, could be the same. No idea. But it doesn't feel like it's going to be the same boss, same as the old boss, or new boss, same as the old boss kind of situation here.
Yeah, I think what the current Iran incident has demonstrated is that the alliances that had been more or less stable, give or take, since the end of World War II have essentially broken down. Europe isn't quite sure whose side they're on, but China and Russia have become and have remained serious world powers. So if you look at UN Security Council, it's now not just Russia or USSR/Russia vetoing everything. It's now them and China. And they are the players in the room that we have to think about. Some of Europe is grudgingly helping the United States with Iran, not Spain, very notably, but France, even Germany, the UK have said, okay, just don't say too much about it and we'll help you out here. But I think what that shows is that Europe has become, I mean, it's still important, but it's become kind of this wild card. The US is a wild card, but if the US is the one guaranteeing the rules, they can kind of be the wild card, right? So I think we're in a situation where whatever comes after Iran, there's going to be a reckoning, particularly for NATO. What is its use? If it's a military alliance, but the military part doesn't work when someone asks to, then it's not really an alliance. How do we deal with Russia and China, who are kind of outside of that? And they are really kind of outside the UN as well, but they're serious. So not like Iran and North Korea, which are serious in their own way, but they're not like major world players.
Right.
So I think we're going to see kind of a reordering that the system set up after World War II was set up for a situation that no longer exists.
And I think we're going to see a shift, at least in the Trump administration. And remember, his term ends in 2028 or 2029, from multilateralism to unilateralism. Organizations like the UN and NATO, which were the linchpin of the post-war rules-based world order, are going to become much, much less important and much less a focus for the United States. And what Trump will be doing is what he did on The Apprentice, basically making deals unilaterally with this country, with that country, but not in a multilateral way. As far as the Trump administration is concerned, NATO is pretty much dead as far as they're concerned. They're not going to necessarily say this right now, but in the aftermath of, if we have an aftermath of this Iranian situation, I think when you have basically Marco Rubio, who is not J.D. Vance, who does come out of a multilateralist tradition, if he is saying basically that NATO is dead, then it's pretty much dead. However, we do have elections in the United States, and in 2029, we could have a Democratic president who is a multilateralist and try to restore this rules-based world order that Trump, I think, is giving up on.
Although I do think that there would be difficult for someone to rebuild a lot of it, largely because China has gone its own way now, right?
Yeah.
WTO, right? Partly because the U.S. has been throwing sand in its gears, but China doesn't need the World Trade Organization anymore, and it's got a big enough economy and links to Europe and whatnot. Russia doesn't need it. Whatever happens with Iran, they don't need it. And these are major kind of trading people. India could probably do without it. And so I think if whoever comes in after Trump says, oh, we want to go back to the 70s or whatever, right? They're going to say, we have better things now that are advantageous to us, right? Being multilateral is of great advantage to people who are not in power. Right. So after World War II, the UN is good for European powers because they know they're shot. Right. They're no longer imperial powers. But now that multilateralism doesn't advantage China. It doesn't advantage Russia. It doesn't advantage India necessarily. And so they're going to say, why would I bind myself to an institution that doesn't have advantages for us? And so the United States is going to have to think about that. Whoever follows is like, how do we spin this as an advantage for even those other major powers in the world?
But just because multilateralism is dead does not mean that the United States does not need allies.
True.
And
That's true.
that's where I think what we'll call the conservative nationalism of the Republican right, the restrainers, the isolationists, what they don't understand. We may have to construct a alliance system, maybe the way alliances looked before World War I, where you had two sides basically. But the idea that the multilateralism is dead, the UN is dead, NATO is dead, all that is dead, does not mean that the United States goes it alone. It is essential to have allies. We will just be able to pick them up and choose them on a more ad hoc basis. But it's not that we don't need allies anymore. And I think restrainers on the right have to understand that.
But the risk, of course, is that the multilateral organizations, you get allies for free, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. But whereas if you do them one at a time, you've got to maintain those relationships and like buy them candy all the time.
Right.
Where with multilateral, it's like, oh, you're part of the organization. Okay, I'll help you out. Right. This is what happened with the first Iraq war. I was like, oh, we're going to invoke Article 5, so you have to come help us.
Right.
It's like, oh, okay. As opposed to having to go and kind of bargain.
Yeah, even domestically, you might be seeing this firsthand. You're a little out of the game teaching-wise, but you hear story after story about the brain drain. People nervous about their research projects on a doctorate level not necessarily being guaranteed. And China says, "Oh, we've got the funding. We'll make sure." And I promise you, we just got the one leader. Nothing's going to change.
That's right. And he'll purge anyone else.
Yeah. All right. We have to before we go. Actually, Ethan did want to mention, and I think it's worth saying because it just adds something to the conversation, but we really can't add much to it. He sent an article from Drop Site News essentially highlighting Iran rejects U.S. narrative that it must adhere to Trump's negotiation framework, showing that this 10-point plan was available as early as March 27th. So the madman approach seems a little bit more random, at least in Ethan's perspective, which I think is a fair assessment there as well, Ethan, and I appreciate you taking part in the show. Unfortunately, we have to squeeze one more break in here, so I just have to kind of leave that hang right there. We got Jerry Baudet, Arnold Schobert. We've got a little bit of time. We'll be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY. You guys may have noticed over the last couple of years, but I've become a bit of a cynic while doing this show. Jerry and Arnold are in the Myron Construction Studio, the professors from Lawrence University, to help pull me out of that cynicism. And I just don't know, guys. I just don't know. But Jerry, I love your optimism on this because this has inspired you. It brings you back to the time because Arnold, you weren't alive. No, yeah, you weren't alive. Neither Arnold nor I saw the first quote fingers moon landing back in 1969. You were there, and I'm sure this probably harkened back to some memories and the excitement that kind of went there. And it kind of inspired you to put a list together that kind of ties into this Artemis 2 takeoff that I kind of find interesting here. So what do you have for us? And Arnold, we're going to react with 3 minutes and 52 seconds, so we're going to have to go quickly here. But what are your thoughts, Jerry?
Well, I think that with all America's problems, with all the challenges that we face, that thinking about how America was first in so many areas, I think should be a source of great pride to us. And I just made a list. I'm just going to go right down the list really quickly. The United States was first in the telephone, the electric light, recording technology, flight, auto production, skyscrapers, film, radio, atomic energy, television, personal computers and computers generally, radar, DNA technology, internet technology, Silicon Valley, space exploration, of course, military technology. We saw that over the weekend when we rescued that downed flyer, artificial intelligence and medical technology. First in the world in all of those categories. And you have to say, there's something about America. This is not a coincidence that we're first in all these areas. There's something about America, something about Americans, that we're always innovative. We're always looking for the next thing. We're always pushing the limits. And I think that's something to be proud of. No other country in the world has that kind of resume.
I think it ties into the interest of some of other countries' smartest people wanting to come here and build a life, which kind of ties into the way the conversation ended there. But I mean, you got to admit, it's an impressive list that kind of highlights. I notice a lot of those are older.
That's true.
Yeah, like we haven't been as innovative as we used to be.
And
but
some of these are government supported.
Of course.
Yeah. So in other words, you can't just say, "Oh, it's capitalism,"
It's Thomas Edison, right?
Yeah. It's
right.
Edison.
Yeah, it's a lot of, obviously atomic energy, government supported, space, government supported. So it's not just a question of capitalism versus socialism, but I do think that there is something in the air here, something in the atmosphere that makes Americans reach farther than people in other countries.
Well, there was this saying, who I cannot remember to whom to attribute it, but that America was the first new nation, in the sense that there wasn't feudalism to tie it down. There was opportunity because there weren't really rules. And my favorite quote from Jules Verne in 80 Days Around the World is that they're going to run a locomotive engine over a gulch where the bridge is really rickety. And the engineer doesn't want to do it. And Jules Verne's side comment as the author is, Americans are usually so rash at everything that you should pay attention when they don't want to do something. And I think that points to this, is that Americans historically have been willing to try all kinds of things and been willing to fail, because even the moon launch, even this Artemis 2, you look at its history, it's not so good. There's failure, cost overruns, and yet we still kind of carry on. And I think there's something ingenious about that.
Maybe the most American of all of these are the Wright brothers, who failed over and over again until they succeeded. And again, I think there's something very American about that.
Hey, I will end this with some advice I got from one of my mentors in Pittsburgh. I never met a failure that stopped trying. And that's kind of the attitude that we're dealing with there. That's Jerry Podair. That's Arnold Schober. I'm Ben Cominos. Thank you for listening today, guys. You can check the show out on Political Voices Network on YouTube at 1 p.m. Thank you for watching on YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. And we'll be back and Haley's up next. Thanks for being here, guys, outside the box.